By the way, Independent Bookstore Day was amazing. It was the 10th anniversary.
That was in April? When was that?
Yesterday.
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 Yeah, it was yesterday, and quite
And
exciting. Are we? Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. What a pleasure it is to welcome Dennis Lehane back, even if it's virtually. At least we get to talk to him. And Michael Koryta. And Ian is holding up one of our autographed copies of Small Mercies. So many thanks again to Dennis for signing them for us. Thanks, Ian. I really appreciate that. Before we turn this over to Michael, who I'm sure has penetrating, deep questions, right, Michael? You always do.
Pages of them.
Pages of them. Great. In the New York Times this morning, there was an essay called Read Your Way Through Boston by Paul Theroux. And I thought it was interesting, Dennis, the other book that he selected by you, he had The Friends of Eddie Coyle. But then Mystic River, of course, was always going to be in it, but he picked Sacred. And I thought, that was an interesting choice because, I mean, I first read you with The Drink Before the War, and Sacred's what, the third book in the
Third book, yeah.
But he says,
and half of it takes place in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, very strange. Okay.
Well, he says the Dorchester of Sacred.
Okay.
All right. Well, I just thought, it was an interesting choice. So then, of course, Mystic.
Yeah. Well, we'll take it. Thank you, Mr. Theroux. I didn't realize that.
Indeed. So, Mystic River is the book that almost everybody, when they hear the word Dennis Lehane, is like the first word or first title that springs to mind. But for me, it's The Drink Before the War, which, as I told Dennis years ago, I postponed reading all the way through the year it was published because I thought it was a war novel about World War I. Not my favorite subject. But anyway, when I finally read it, I was just blown away. And it went on to win the Shameless Award. And it was the first of the Angie and Patrick, or Patrick and Angie, whichever way you want to look at it, series. But Dennis, I'm trying to remember, have you written anything with the same characters since once you stopped writing the Angie and Patrick books, or are they basically all standalones?
Oh, no. The Given Day, Live by Night, and World Gone By are all linked. It's the same family. It's the Kaufmans. Okay. Yeah. So, and Joe goes through all three books. So yeah, I've done that. But now, yeah. Sorry.
Well, obviously, my memory is somewhat faulty here, but anyway, Small Mercies has been compared to not compared to, but people mention it as it linked to Mystic River for lots of reasons. So I'm assuming Michael Koryta is going to explore that. So Michael, by the way, has a new book coming out in July, and he'll be with us July 29th. So we're excited to see him again after all these years in 2019. But meantime, here he is to talk to you about Small Mercies. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Dennis. Truly good to see you, even if it's virtual.
Yeah, man.
And a pleasure to talk about this book, to say the least. I wanted to kind of start off by talking about, you have sort of an origin story, a memory of your own encounter with this moment in time that didn't inspire the book, but I believe it sort of froze the emotional intensity that informs the book into your mind. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit just about that and how long you've been turning this world over before writing about it.
There's a protest that occurs at the very end of the book, and the last, I think it's with about 3-4 chapters to go, and that protest was one that my father took a wrong turn into when I was a kid, and I was in the car, and it was at night. I don't know if it was late 74, early 75. I'm not sure. It's been kind of lost. And I still don't know why he took that wrong turn. They must have blocked Broadway off, or they must have blocked our right-hand turn, because I have a very strong memory of coming over the Broadway bridge, and normally we'd go to the right, and somehow he went straight. We went right into the middle of this protest, and the protest was thousands of people, and they were burning. I never knew what an effigy was. And they were hanging these effigies from these lamp poles of Arthur Garrity, the judge in the busing case, and of Teddy Kennedy, and of Wade Taylor in the Boston Globe. And they were hanging them in effigy and then lighting them on fire. and we were trapped. I was just trapped. Like the car was just moving, buffeting down this ton of people, and it was medieval. It's the only word I can use to describe it. It felt like something you'd see at the end of Frankenstein when they all go to, or Young Frankenstein even, where they, and it was terrifying. I've never been, I'd be hard pressed to think of a moment I've been more afraid in my life. And there was nothing was happening to us. We were just sort of buffering along. Once people looked in and saw we were the right skin complexion, we were okay.
Was your dad talking to you during this stretch, or what were you feeling from him?
No, my dad deals with stress the way I deal with stress, which is very interesting. My dad, he got tight. He got really tight and quiet. And he was like, it's okay, it's okay. And then that was it. That's all he said. And we just buffeted our way through this crowd. And they were screaming things like, they were screaming some legitimate things like, well, they one of their big slogans was "Hell no, we won't go," which was the boycott slogan, and they were screaming that, and they were screaming, "End of tyranny," but then they were screaming some really horrible racist stuff too. So it was like and again, I was the right shade. My skin was the right shade, and we looked. My father was a working class guy. My father was a working class guy. We were driving a Chevy. I mean, we fit. We weren't. Going to be. They weren't going to flip our car or anything, but it was still quite terrifying. So
did you have at that time, I mean, you mentioned a couple of times, like, you were the right race, right skin tone to get through this terrifying sort of gauntlet. But in that moment, did you have the sense of, if not for that, what would be happening here? Or was that a question that you didn't really like intellectualize until later?
I don't think I intellectualized until later. It was, in those days, it's even mentioned in the book. In those days, in 1974 in South Boston was, the streets are alphabetical. They're literally the letters of the alphabet. So you got A, B, C, D, and then you got East 9th and East 8th and West 8th and West 9th. But you cross the Broadway Bridge, you hit A, and then it's B, C, D. No African American would have made it to B alive in those days. Wouldn't have happened. Just wouldn't have happened. It was 100% Irish with a couple of Poles, and that was it. And you didn't go in there if you were African American. No chance in hell. That held until the 80s. And every time that they would send somebody into a housing project there under Section 8 housing, if they were African American or Latinx or anything like that, they would be firebombed out within 24 hours. It was standard. So, what you had with the busing issue was, with busing, the desegregation had to happen, and 100% had to happen right then, right there. There was no question. Justice had been delayed far too long. The orders that started desegregation of the Boston Public Schools were handed down in 1965. This was 1974, and they still weren't segregating. They were still fighting desegregation. And so the issue is, the powder keg issue was the way it was done at the last minute. At the last minute, the suburbs pulled out of the agreement. And what was supposed to be a county-wide decision became only the city, only the inner city, only the poor neighborhoods. And you had legitimate people in Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, Dorchester, South Boston, Charlestown, who were legitimately saying, hey, how come you guys always tell us what we're going to do? You want to drop an expressway through the city? Guess what? It goes right through the middle of our town, not anybody else's. And so my father was quite angry, and my father, a non-racist, was quite angry about that issue. He was like, hey, here they come again, these limousine liberals in their all white towns telling us how we're going to live. And I do believe that was a legitimate argument that was swept up within this powder keg of racism that was so prevalent in so many of the neighborhoods. And then what you got for it, and what all anybody remembers of it, is just a horrific racism, which was there, believe me.
And you came in writing about race. I mean, Barbara mentioned A Drink Before the War, which that's your first novel. It's, as she mentioned, won the Seamus. It's a PI novel, but to me, the PI elements in that, you're having fun with those. and they're great. You know, it's like those are your Robert B. Parker nods and your Chandlers and everything. But what you're writing about really in that book is a moment in time, and it's about race and class conflict and power and powerlessness. And you've come back to this, you've touched on obviously with the Coughlin saga, you've written about it throughout your career. So I'm kind of intrigued that you have this moment. You said it's like the most terrifying thing you ever experienced. And it took you like 30 some years to come back to it.
Yeah, more.
At some point you had been thinking about it with a script, right? A series or...
Yeah, for many years I tried to tell the story. The story of busing is this vast conspiracy thriller, like, because that's the 70s. That's the nod to the 70s, because conspiracy thrillers were great.
All the paranoia.
Yeah. And then I had a TV show called The Heights that I came out here and shot. That's what led me out here at first. And when that was all set during this time period with plenty of people involved in the busing crisis. But it just never panned out. And then I went down to New Orleans to make a TV show, which was Blackbird. And everything that could go wrong went wrong, because that's the life of, somebody, wise man said to me, they're all war, that every TV show is war. And everything that go wrong went wrong. We had personality clashes. We had hurricane. We had ungodly heat. We had COVID outbreaks left and right. One that almost killed a guy. It was madness. And we're over schedule, we're over budget, we're over everything.
You got the fun politics of the year.
Everything was spiraling. And two things happened. One was I had this moment. I think it was the worst moment on set. I was in my trailer. Everything was going crazy. We were calling all these emergency meetings to take up the rest of the day. And I remember thinking, this is pretty bad. It's still not as bad as the middle of a novel. It's just not. It's not. It's like
Valley of the Shadow of Death.
Absolutely. The worst thing in the world is a novel in the middle of a novel, because you have to go through it alone. And then the other thing that happened was, after not being able to write prose for 4 years, and believe me, I tried. I was not messing around. I was trying. This whole book just came flowing out of me, like somebody opened a faucet, and I was writing it in my trailer, and I was writing it at night in my house, my haunted mansion. And I was just writing. I was writing longhand. I was writing. It just flowed out. And I think it's as a kid, I became a writer, I think, because it's a place to hide. It's a place to go. It's a place if your world is chaotic and you have no control over it, and you feel helpless in that regard, you become a writer because you control the world. It's God complex. It's all you, baby. And so here I was in this state of hysteria that I was kind of enjoying. I really did enjoy being a showrunner, even at the worst moments. But I thought, I need something to split me from this madness, and I began writing this book. And it's crazy. 40 years of peace and prosperity. I can't write a line of prose, and go into the
madness, and suddenly
it just flew. It flowed right out of me. It was,
why the present tense?
It felt absolutely necessary. It felt like we needed to be immediate. I didn't want you to feel like it was crusty old 1974. I wanted you to feel like you just got dropped right into busing, and to the heat of that summer. I don't know. I didn't check the Farmer's Almanac from back then, but I remember it as staggeringly hot that summer.
You've got that line in the opening. I think the last sentence of the first page is, it's a better version of very little rain fell.
The author's note. Yeah, the author's note.
Okay. Okay, so that's your memory of it. That's not
the historical note is just to give it context. I tell you about the reality of the Hennigan, Morgan versus Hennigan, and the ruling being dropped down, and everybody had only 90 days to prepare before the first day of school. And then I said it was very hot in Boston that summer, and it rarely rained.
Yeah,
I don't know. It probably did rain every day. I don't know. And it's my job. So,
all right. So I want to come back, if you don't mind, to the idea of these sort of the intense memories, the emotional moment, because I think very frequently you are described as this plot master. Somebody can hand you a story, and I that is not the way you see yourself at all.
I know. I don't get
So
that at all.
talk about that a little bit then, if you don't mind. Because I love reading, you've gotten amazing reviews on this book, and I love reading. I know your work so well, and I know you, and it always kind of makes me laugh in the way that, like, when you read your own press, someone will very confidently describe a trait about your work that often is not what you feel at all. And so, like, when you're described as this, genius of plot, I know that's the way you work in. It seems to me like you're coming from something that is intensely emotional and gives you a character. And then what? How do you decide which one to keep rolling with at that point?
It's just, I had this image in my head of a woman. She's described very early as a picture of her from a childhood looks like somebody who came off an assembly line for Tough Irish Broads, like she was ready to audition for the roller derby or some such shit. That's the line. And that's how I saw her. I saw her like a roller derby. I don't know what you call a roller derbyist. A roller derby.
I think that's as good a term as we're going to have.
A roller derbyist. And I saw her very much as that. I saw her as low to the ground and constantly moving like a shark, just go, 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 go. And so I thought, what if you took this woman and a real project woman? Like I knew women like this, and I knew what they were like, and they were tough as nails, and they would go head to head with a man. I'm not saying they would win in a physical contest.
They weren't afraid of it by any means.
They weren't afraid of it. And you would be bloody. Let's just put it that way before you got one of these women down. And I just thought, I've never seen that woman before. I've just never seen that woman. So that's my woman. And the name Mary Pat has been kicking around for a long time. I grew up with so many women named Mary that they all had to have their middle name. It was like Mary Pat and Mary Jo and Mary Frances and Mary. I even had a riff in the book that slowed the book down, so I took it out, about just the Marys. It was just sort of like Mary Pat runs into a bunch of other Marys at the supermarket, and it's all just how they have different. There's Mary Louise and there's Mary, whatever. And so I saw that and I said, all right, so this woman, if you took everything she had in the summer of 74, as we were running up to busing, and she wanted answers and she wanted closure to whatever happened to her daughter. If you took everything this woman had and gave her nothing left to lose, she'd be the most dangerous person in the neighborhood. And I just said, that's the book. And it was
simple. Kit bag there when she needs it.
What?
The kit bag.
Yeah, she found the kit bag. She found her late husband's burglary kit bag. So that was great. And and I just thought, just let this woman loose on, and they can't deal with her. They try everything. The Irish mob, which ran South Boston at that time, which was one of the major people monetarily behind the anti-busing movement. They funded all of it. They don't know what to do with this woman. They're like, well, we threatened you. We've tried to bribe you. We've done everything. We told you very clearly, if you keep doing this, you will, there will be consequences. And she just won't stop. And I just thought, that's a cool story.
When did you have the car? Mary Pat's car?
Just when she pulls up to scare this kid and these other kids he's hanging with at the back of a supermarket loading dock, and she pulls up to scare them. And I was like, well, if she's, it's novelist instinct. None of this was conscience. It's just sort of like, well, she gets out and she just scares them. There's no story there. But if she gets out, there's something they laugh at. That's it. So what would they laugh at? And I was like, the car. Of course, she showed up to try to scare them, and she forgets that her car is laughable. And that car,
because you describe her as a shark, and she is, and this is where the present tense matters to me so much too, because she's coming in with this sense of threat and speed, and everyone's scattering around her, but her vehicle should be counter to that, and beautifully is. So I love that. The scene that you're talking about, I love that you arrived to that scene without having planned that too, because my guess is we have to have people listening tonight, or who will watch this or whatever, who want to write. And I think this is a perfect example of, you only arrive, and I don't want to speak for you, so
No,
correct,
you're right.
but
I know what you're saying. You're
you
right.
only arrive there if you have worked the muscle. Like you can't plan on Bess, the car, being there without having done so much writing that the subconscious layer is saying, okay, there's going to need to be this thing they laugh at because then it's a scene, then I have the right tension, then I can pivot the emotion of the moment. But I would say that only comes through the repetition of having done it for a long time. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And now with, how much I do as in television, with television, I've said this to people that there's no greater education than writing to production in television. There's none, because you have to do it. You can't be precious. And writing to production means you're already filming. So you're filming and they call you up and they say, we lost that location. And you're saying, the most pivotal location in the episode, yeah, it's gone. They pulled it, but they didn't give it to us. So you got to reset it by tomorrow. And it can't be a night scene anymore. Like that happens all the time. I worked on a TV show set in the Florida Keys, and we were constantly getting calls like, no, we can't do a boat scene today.
Is this Bloodline?
Yeah. We'd get these calls. We can't do a boat scene today. You'd be like, so my co-writer on Bloodline, David Manson, he had a great line. He said, in the end of the day, it all becomes interior kitchen day, right? It's the easiest scene to shoot. So when you're doing that, and you're doing that constantly, and you can't be precious, you just can't. You can't say, I'm sorry, like if I say, I need that scene, they say, well, you can't have it. We have no money. We have 2 days left to shoot, so we'll get somebody else to write it. So then you go, right. And
listening to that, it makes even more sense when you talk about like being in the chaos of production on Blackbird, and finding refuge in the novel. It goes back to that sort of the God complex of the novel.
Oh yeah, for sure.
No one can tell you can't have this thing.
No, you can go as big as you want. You can go as big as you want, or small. But what it does teach you, and I think this is the most important thing, and that was when I was writing Small Mercies, I felt that it teaches you to be very nimble, very nimble. Stay in the scene. You're in the scene, in the moment. What's going on? And my instinct knew, oh, they're going to laugh at her. Okay, what are they going to laugh at? Oh, a car.
And you
think of a car until that moment. And so that happens too with like, I had 2 police officers come to ask her questions. The point was essentially she gets a little information from them. They get a little information from her, but not much. And it puts her at odds with the neighborhood, because you couldn't, in South Boston in 1974, you couldn't be seen talking to police officers. It just wasn't, she likens it to they say, can we come inside? And she thinks bringing a cop inside would be like bringing a pornographer home for Christmas, Christmas dinner. Like, it's like, can't do this. And so I had one of the police officers, because I had him look gruff, I all of a sudden just went the opposite, which is what you want to do, which is he looks gruff, but he's got a really nice voice. And she immediately responds to it. And so there's a connection between them right off the bat. And then he corrects his partner for cussing in front of her, which you didn't do in my neighborhood when I was a kid. You didn't cuss in front of a woman, even if every other word out of that woman's mouth was the F-bomb. You didn't do it until you were told you have permission, right? It's just weird gentility. So once I had them connected that way, I just thought, oh, so now I'm going to just have fun with this guy. And I just kept investing in within the chapter. Within the chapter, I just made him interesting. And I gave him a Marine Corps Zippo letter. So her son had served in Vietnam.
Right.
And I was doing all these things. And then he leaves the book and he's gone. He's out. He's not coming back. He's done. But then he just kept knocking on the door going, remember how fun I was? Like,
yeah.
Oh, cool. Like,
you could use me right now.
Yeah, you could use me right now. And when the book got to a pitch of darkness, I think at about 90 pages in, it reaches a really dark place. And I was like, I need to step away from this now. I need to look away and let her go through some grief for a couple of days. How do I do that? Oh, I pick up the investigation from Bobby's point of view, the police officer. And it leavened the book. It lightened the book so much. It helped so much.
Oh, he's a huge help. Otherwise, it could that could be tough emotional sledding as a read to
Mhm.
just stay with her through that.
That whole run, I mean, it's brutal, and I just gave her a little, I gave her a break, I gave the reader a break, and suddenly I have this character who represents hope, is what he becomes in the book. He's the light. He's, his life goes up in an upward swing, and yeah.
And
So
you've always had those kind of characters pushing against the darkness. It might not be the protagonist. It probably usually isn't. I'm trying to think who that would be in Shutter Island, but I don't need to.
Oh, it's where you can't tell, you can't say who it is.
Yeah,
without
exactly.
Knowing the plot, even though
Right.
20 years later, it's spoiler alert. But no, there's two characters who represent hope in that book, but they're hidden, so it can't be revealed until the end.
So I've been a student of yours formally and informally for years, and one of the things you taught me very early that I come back to this day, and it just, whether it's a novel or a script, it can save a scene. It's what does the character want, which seems so easy. It seems so easy as to be like glib and pointless, but it's so also easy and simple to forget that. And it's that idea that Vonnegut or Mamet idea of if the audience knows what the character wants, if it's a bottle of milk, cup of coffee, whatever, we're going to follow them. But when I look at your work, I feel as if you're also very much driven by what does the character fear. And I'm curious if you really thought that through, or if that's just me picking it up on a read, because so many of the wants seem shaped, whether it's Mary Pat or Jimmy and Mystic, they share the same want, right? They want first their daughter to come home. Then when the daughter doesn't come home, they want vengeance. But that's ultimately shaped by a fear. And I kind of like that consistent thread throughout all of your work. I mean, the Coughlins are always trying to get something new, but it's ultimately because they're afraid of losing something as well. I was just curious if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, or if
I guess, I mean, I do. I look, I have a lot of fears. I mean, certainly as a parent, I have a ton of fears. Parenting is fear management on blast. So, I think some of that went into this book. I think that what we fear so much, but both as parents as people, is that maybe we've done more damage than we know by living on this planet. And certainly that's something that Mary Pat has to come to terms with.
You've got a great line where she thinks about the little grenades of hate that are being thrown out into the world that are their children.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just, it was.
Well, that's what an African-American woman says to her. And
okay, is it in the scene when she goes to the house? Yeah.
That's my no hugging, no learning moment. That's the I didn't want there to be a kumbaya. Hey, all us whites and blacks can get along at the end of this book. I thought that was just going to be a betrayal of what the book's about. She has to truly take on the weight of what she did without knowing she was doing it, in terms of teaching hate to her children. And that's what happens. Nobody, if you put a black kid and a white kid who are 4 years old in a playground, they got no trouble playing with each other. You put those same kids in a place when they're 8, it might be a different story.
Yeah.
Racism is taught. Racism is handed down. Racism is the worst thing that you can give to your children, I think. And it was something I wanted her to, because she starts the book thinking she's not a racist. And she's literally baffled by the fact that her husband, her second husband, has left her because, and the quote is very direct, "Your hate embarrasses me." And she doesn't know what that means. She has no clue. And it's only through this journey that she starts to see, oh my God, this is what we've done, And that hand grenade thing was, came from, I was at a party once, and there were 2 boys there, and they'd clearly been raised poorly by a mother who didn't want, I'm going to be careful about how I tell the story, but by a mother who clearly hadn't wanted kids, and she raised two boys, and they hated women. You could feel it, you could see it. And this is when they were young. And I remember they were at this party and they were so destructive. And one of them walked up. My daughter was 2 years old. She was 2. She was just following this little ball across this backyard. And this kid just walked on over real casually and just kicked the ball into the forest. And like, my daughter looked at me like, what the fuck was that? Like, even at 2, she's also this great, what the
world shouldn't be this way, even at 2.
Yeah, she was like, she wasn't hurt, but she was like, and I was like, damn, man. And we talked about it later. Me and some of my friends talked about it later. And we were angry as parents, and particularly the ones who were parents of girls. We were like, you're sending little hand grenades out into the world. And my daughters are going to be affected by that. And so this is, when Mary Pat really gets her comeuppance on a racial level, on a racist level, she's told by, an African American woman that, you sent these little hand grenades of hate out into the world, and people got hurt. And that's, but then Bobby buffets it by saying, look, parenting is failure. That's what all parents know. All parents know failure, and
when you write Mystic River and Gone Baby Gone, where you're dealing with crimes against children and the threat to a parent, you didn't have kids yet.
No, I didn't have kids yet. No.
Does it actually feel different to come to the page and deal with this type of story once you've gone through the experience?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I didn't think I'd ever do a book like this again. It just came. This book was fueled by it. I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize it until I finished it. There was a type of exorcism writing this book. I know how dark this book is, and people are really surprised when I tell you this. It was the funnest book I ever wrote. It just flowed out of me. I was in a joyous state while I was writing it. I wasn't in a dark place. I was like, this is great. And I realized, I said to my wife later, I said, it feels like an exorcism. It feels like I purged something. And I realized what I purged. And the one thing I will say that during the writing of this book was I was shocked how much rage was coming out of me. Like all Mary.
Oh, there's a palpable rage in it. Yeah.
There's so much rage in this book. And I realized finally, I was like, oh, that's the answer. I've been wondering my entire life. I had a nice upbringing. I had 2 parents who protected me, who gave, stayed together, put food on the table, supported me. I had no trauma that I could point to in my childhood, none. And yet I've always had this capacity for anger, very deep in me, but it's there. And I thought, where does that come from? And I was writing this book and it all became clear. And I was like, I am furious that at the age of 9, a bunch of racists took my childhood. They did a lot worse to other people. But at the end of the day, when you're 9 years old and you're watching people or people you see around the neighborhood every day, and they're on a corner throwing rocks at buses filled with children, you stop being a kid. You can't put the two together. You can never reconcile the two. Or if you got somebody who you love, who you care about, and they're sitting there and they're saying the N-word left and right, and they're saying they deserve what's coming to them, and they're saying things like they wouldn't get stoned if they didn't come in this neighborhood. That's the moral logic. And you're watching these people go to church, and you're watching these people say hi to you and rub your little head like you're a cool little kid. You can't reconcile the two. You can't. And from that point on, I swear to God, from the summer of 74, certainly by early 75, I never felt like a kid again. And that's what went into this book.
Dennis, I ask you how much what's been going on in the last few years may have affected this book also? Because you're writing about 1974, but in many ways you could be writing about, right now.
Right now. And the thing that got me about everything that's been going on in the last several years in this country is how unsurprising any of it is to me. I grew up with a front row seat for that type of racism and rage. And just objectification of the other, of just saying, no, whatever, they deserve what they get. And to see it. And again, whataboutisms was a big thing. Like I would say to somebody with a 10, you're okay with somebody throwing a rock at a bus? And they'd go, do you know what's happening in the bathrooms of South Boston High School? They always had the same story. There was some white girl just got beat up for being in the bathroom, beat up by a bunch of, and you'd be like, okay, but can we get back to the bus? But you couldn't never get back to the bus. You could never get back to the conversation. So what you're seeing right now in this country is, as in the world, it's not just this country, it's the world. As you're seeing these massive demographic shifts, you're seeing the people who had been in power, or certainly had it working out well for them, they're not dealing well with the change at all.
Yeah, there's a tremendous surge in tribalism. Somebody wrote about your book, I thought said it very well, that part of your book is just, writing about the blind eye we turn towards the evil men can do if they are not one of our own.
Yeah, I would say so. I've been writing about tribalism in some form or another my entire career. I think it's the unifying thing in most of my books. And these are some dark times we're going through right now, for sure. And I have this, I would just leave it there. These are some dark times we're in right now.
Does the distance from Boston play a role in coming back to look at it with the sort of honesty you're talking about? I guess that's an odd way of asking. Could you have written the book if you're still living in Boston, or did you need some removal?
Yeah, no, I could have written the book. I mean, you knew me when I was in Boston trying to tell this story in another way.
Yeah.
When I lived in Boston, and I came up with the idea of the Heights. And this I would have written this if I lived wherever. I think the response to it in the neighborhoods in Boston, there might be, I haven't heard it yet, but I'm certainly prepared for there to be, oh, you're over dramatizing, oh, it wasn't that bad, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. And there's a book called Dorchester Days by Eugene Richards. Eugene Richards took the photograph that's on the cover of the book, that photograph right there. And he was a stringer for the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, and he went in and he covered Boston and South Boston and Dorchester, my neighborhood. And if you read Dorchester Days, suddenly there's a South Boston section in it, and it's all during the busing crisis, all of it. And what you see in those photographs, that wasn't crisis actors, that wasn't faked. That's really what was going on down there. And you see the graffiti, and you see signs people had in their windows, and you see huge swath of wall covered in KKK. This is in an eastern city in 1974. So and then on top of all of that, you want to look, I'm a crime novelist at the end of the day. I wanted to just tell the most propulsive story I could tell. And I think if there's a nod in here to any other work, I feel like I was paying a little bit of tribute to Get Carter, which I love. I absolutely adore the film. I've never read Ted Lewis's book, I admit, but I love that film. So
you're someone like me. I think you would say you were as affected by movies as novels in terms of your desire to want to tell stories.
Yeah, sure.
So this one, unless I'm mistaken, you're going to take the adaptation on for Small Mercies, correct?
Yeah, I'm doing it as a limited TV show.
So you had unbelievably good luck early, just kind of like handing the book off and saying, now I'm stepping away, and whatever Brian Helgeland, Eastwood, you do your thing. I don't need the control of this. Then there's, what was the first, was The Drop the first thing?
The Drop was the first thing I wrote from. Yeah.
So I guess I have kind of two questions along those lines. One, when did you know, what was the moment that sort of flipped the switch where you said, no, I do want to hang on to this. I do want to do it myself. And then the second half of that is, if you had done that too early, what do you think would have gone wrong? Why did you hold back?
Because I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I knew enough Thank God. I knew enough when I started writing for The Wire that I didn't know much. You know what I mean? And everybody was like, "You've written 6 novels." I'm like, "Yeah, but I never wrote a teleplay. You know, I don't know how to write to this medium. I don't know what I'm doing." And the thing was, is the great thing about The Wire was none of us did. And so it really helped. That's why the show's so iconoclastic, because we didn't know. Like, somebody mentioned to me in Pelicanos at one point, they were like, "So you know, do you guys ever consider writing to the beat and to the break? Sorry, writing to the break." And George and I looked at each other. We were like, "What is that?" And the guy looked at us with like hate on his face. Writing to the break is writing to the commercial. And we didn't know how to do that. We had no clue. So we just kind of wrote. But I knew that I didn't know enough. And so I studied on The Wire. How do I get better? How do I get better? How do I get more of my script into each episode? You know, and I would do that. So first time I wrote for The Wire, I got about 40% on screen. Second time it was around 75, 80. Third time it was 95. And I was getting better. I was getting better, better, better. And then, but the thing that was the real game changer for me was I went to work with David E. Kelley on Mr. Mercedes. And David was really starting to be pulled into Big Little Lies and Big Little Lies 2 at that point. And he said, "You really got to feel for this. Just run with it. Just run it." And he made me a de facto showrunner. And so I did. I was psyched. And I learned, that's when I started writing nonstop. And it was during the writing of Mr. Mercedes where I thought, this is in my DNA now. It took 10 years to implement.
I was just going to say, is that 10 years? Are you right there?
I called my brother and I said, the 10-year rule is right. I said, I just feel like now I got this. And he said, "But didn't you start for The Wire about 12 years ago?" And I was like, yeah, you're right. Thanks.
There's always the guy with the calendar.
Yeah. So in my case, it was 12 years. But then I felt like, okay, now I understand this, because they are such different mediums. The books are textual. Books are about the best stuff in Small Mercies to me is all the stuff that happened in her head or Bobby's head. There's a passage where Bobby remembers Vietnam and he globalizes it and he says what that means to the world they're in now.
And it wouldn't be on screen by any means.
Never on screen. There's a moment where my favorite chapter in this book is when Mary Pat comes home after beating the ever-living shit out of 6 women. And she comes home and she feels alive again. And she remembers her past. And she remembers what her life was like growing up with these crazy brothers and sisters in this tiny, apartment. And how it turned her into this battle axe. And I thought, none of that's going to show up in a movie. It's just done. So, and film is cinematic. Film is an image. Film is, Brian Hugelin taught me that more than anybody else, just by what he did with the opening of Mystic River. He took everything that I had put into this very internal narrative, Jimmy's memories of what it was to be a kid, then when Dave disappeared, and he turned it into an image, them writing their names on cement. And before Dave can finish his name, the cops.
Yeah, he's already disappearing. Yep.
He's disappearing. And I just thought, that's brilliant. And I wouldn't have known how to do that.
You've spoken a few times. You've said that this is possibly, or maybe even probably, you feel like your last book.
Possibly.
So I ask on behalf of all your readers, why? Why do you feel this way?
Well, it's because the book, again, this being an open faucet book was the exception, not the rule. Books were getting harder and harder for me to write. I was having just a more and more difficult time. And part of it, I think, was feeling as if I had to, feeling as if, I got a deadline coming, I was just never the type of writer who could write that way. Like, God, my hat's off to like Mike Conley and James Lee Burke and these people who can just write book a year or write to deadline or write, come up with an idea and just go. Because and not no difference in quality, not a market difference in quality at all. I can't. The simple answer is I can't. And so when I finished this, I thought, I don't have any more ideas in my head right now. I don't, I'm hung up building my next TV show and I'm out of contract. I'm not in contract for the first time in 25 years. I don't owe anybody. So if this is it, if this is the mic drop, I'm good with it. If it's not, then the next book comes from a completely pure place.
Yeah.
I'm not writing it for a deadline. I'm not writing it to earn back in advance. I'm not writing it because my agent would kind of like her bottom line to be a little better. None of that. It's you're just writing it. And then I finish it. And then I can say, oh, who would like this book? Like that's a luxury,
Yeah.
man. That's
a different world.
It really
Yeah,
is.
so-
Dennis, years ago, P.D. James let me know that she wrote every book that way. She never had a contract. She wrote her book and then she would submit it. And if they took it, it was fine. And if they didn't, it was okay. And I had I won't name her, but a writer recently at the store said the same thing to me, finished a contract and said, from now on, if I write, it's going to be because it's something I want to do. If it gets published, fine. If it doesn't, okay. But it was very, very freeing, very liberating. And so maybe, in fact, you will find ideas, come to you now that you don't feel like she called it an obligation. It was a debt. She felt like it was a debt to have a contract and that she could write.
Well, it is.
John Cosby and I were just talking about this. You grew up working class and they pay you money.
Right.
And you owe them. It's as simple as that. You are beholden to them. And that's grinding down on you in the back of your subconscious, as you're trying to do all these other things. And you're like, I still owe them a book. I still owe them a book. I still owe them a book. And
you don't feel that way, though. It doesn't sound like with screenplays, which is the same thing. In fact, it's more intense. I mean, you can always push a book back. Script, when you're talking about writing to production, like the example you just gave.
Yeah. But the difference is that prose to me is far harder than so. The example I always use is this in Live by Night. Joe goes to the opening of a hotel, the Hotel Statler in 1927, and I sourced it. And it was what you see in that book is exactly the way, not exactly, but it was pretty close to the way newspaper reports at the time reported it. And he goes in and he has to cross this huge ballroom with a ton of stuff going on to get to the other side to meet somebody. And I have to show him move through that ballroom and yet not stop the action. Like he has to be moving, but yet you have to see everything around him. And that sequence took me 2 weeks. I still remember it was brutal. It was brutal, just brutal. I was just like, oh, now you got to show the violin guys. Now you got to, there's a cake and there's some people got champagne and what does it smell like? And what is it? I was doing all that in a script. That's interior ballroom night.
And someone takes it and
boom, someone takes care of it. And I write really bare scripts. The only person who writes more bare scripts, more bare than me is Martin McDonagh, who writes like the barest scripts I've ever seen. But I write really stripped down scripts. I don't get into,
I love that example, by the way, but the hotel ballroom, because I think that is the sort of element when you talk about writing to people who either they want to do it or they're just breaking into it, they would not imagine the problem piece is having a character cross the ballroom. But then when you're really like in the foxhole, it's absolutely as you're giving that example, I can think of like 5 of my own. It's like, oh yeah, it's not the big plot twist. It's not the reveal. It's never those things. But when it feels like you are just pushing the boulder uphill and it's impossible is when it's something like that you owe the character, you owe the audience getting it right. And if you get it right, it won't pop out at anyone. But if you have to do your job. The absence of
nobody's reading the ballroom scene in Live by Night going, damn, that's some writing. You know what I mean? Like just reading the ballroom scene, like and there's it's funny, you've been pushing the rock up the hill. And the other thing that it feels like, which is a metaphor for pushing the rock up the hill, but in John Wick 4, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the steps, he gets all the way to the top of the steps and he gets thrown down the steps. It's like, that's what a lot of writing novels is. You climb all the way to the top and you realize it doesn't work. And
you can write really good stuff
on the steps,
but it wasn't the right stuff.
Right. Exactly.
So it has to go. And that's an emotionally grueling thing to do really good work and realize it's not the right work.
And in a script, I think you go into a script thinking a script is not a finite product at all. I don't think of them that way. I think of them as just blueprints, and I'm going to be tearing that thing apart, and it's going to go into 50 other pages, and it's going to go into pink drafts, it's going to go into green drafts, it's just going to keep going. So you don't feel the same person, you're not invested personally in
No, and even at that point, even at your last draft, it's going into the hands of a bunch of different artists to bring their own version of it. I mean, it's
absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's
Interestingly enough, I think there are novelists who really don't like that. I mean, I've had that discussion at the store with writers, who feel like, having somebody else take their work and, actors change whatever. It changes on the screen. And so readers are always saying, how did you feel when, the film or whatever, the TV thing didn't come out like your book?
I think my feeling is that it's two different beasts. It's two different beasts.
Exactly.
It's just not the same at all. I feel like Mystic River is like the Mystic River, the movie is Clint Eastwood and Brian Helgeland and all those actors, and I'm the source material. It's great. It's fun, but it doesn't change the book. The book
it doesn't change the book. Yeah.
No,
And when you talk about not being precious about your own stuff, it's you did the deal for a reason. I need Dennis to source this line for me because I'm always crediting it to Dennis, but I love it. It's the novelist who makes the deal with Hollywood for his book and then complains about the result. It's like the guy who walks out of the horror house complaining that he didn't feel loved.
Yeah. That's
who is our ultimate source on that? Or
I have no idea. I have no idea who said that, but
But
the old
I
joke.
was actually referring to readers. I wasn't referring to how writers react to it. I was thinking readers, I think, expect the film of the book to be more like the book than it often, than it can be.
Sure.
Yeah, you got to throw out 80% of a book to get a movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if the screenwriter strike actually happens, Dennis, you will have more time when you're not writing. Maybe some idea will strike you.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. We'll see. I have to go into production though. We just locked 4 scripts. These 4 scripts I won't be able to touch, and we're going into pre-production on the next show. So I don't think I'll be writing a book. But then again, I didn't think I'd be writing a book when I was making Black. You never know.
Right.
So since we have Michael here, Michael, give us a tiny preview of your book coming out in July.
I know nothing about this. Is this a Koryta or something?
It is a Koryta. It is not my friend Scott Carson, although he's hard at work too. It's a nice, cheerful story set on an island off the coast of Maine. I'm in Maine about half the year now, and the sort of inspiration for this was realizing there was a somewhat spectacular murder that happened on this island called Vinyl Haven during the pandemic, right after the pandemic, like 2020. And there was one cop on the island. There was one deputy who literally has policing jurisdiction of this entire community. And they basically made him leave. I mean, once he lost the people on that island, he was gone. And I just thought that was so amazing. There's one cop on this community investigating the murder. So I just I moved it to a yacht, and I killed 7 people instead of 1. And the one cop on the island is bad. So with that cheerful start, it's what can go wrong?
What's the title?
An Honest Man.
Oh, that's great.
Very nice. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about it. Why don't we see if Ian come forth, if Ian has questions or comments from the audience that he'd like to address.
Oh, yes. We have lots of questions that have come through.
Okay, fire. We'll do rapid fire round. Let's do it.
First question, is the character Marty somewhat based on Whitey Bulger?
His name's Marty Butler. Yeah, I mean, I think you can draw your own conclusions that there's a lot of parallels. There are 4 storylines in Small Mercies that if you knew Boston mob lore, or you even knew Boston crime history, they're based on real things. So yeah, I would say, possibly.
How young were you when your dad made that wrong turn down the street?
I was 9 years old.
What influences did your Irish heritage have on your life and on your work?
Oh, a lot. I was my dad didn't read. He could, but he didn't like to. And he didn't like fiction. He didn't like movies. It was so bizarre. He never read any of my books. He fell asleep during all my movies. He just took big naps during Mystic River and Shutter Island. And, but he was a great storyteller. And my relatives, his brothers, his sisters, my mother's brothers and sisters, and their spouses and whatever, they all got together every weekend, every single weekend at somebody's house. They all lived in Boston. They all lived in the inner city, and they would get together and they would just tell stories, and it was great. I mean, I grew up listening to stories.
Does writing for television or film require a different writing muscle?
Yes, completely different. It's again, as we spoke before, it's very much about image. It's very much about action, people doing things. You can't have people sitting around thinking in a TV show. You have to see them do things. And it's a way to, I'll give you a perfect example of a scene where I was super proud of, and everybody involved loves the scene. And people don't even notice it, which is in Blackbird. At one point, the Greg Kinnear character, who's an investigating officer in the first episode, as he's talking on the phone, getting some information, notices that his window is getting stuck, the window in his office. And he takes out a little toolkit and he fixes it. And that whole, while he's going on, and that whole scene is meant, like, that tells you every single thing you need to know about that character for the rest of the show. It's all in how methodical, painstaking, does what needs to be done. He does it when it needs to be done, moves forward. And that's writing for film. That's exactly what writing for film is.
Your characters are always well characterized and never banal. Where do you get your inspiration for them? Do your characters have something from people you really know?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very vivid place. I grew up in a place where a lot happened. There's the line that's considered either a curse or a kindness, which is, may you be born in interesting times. I was born in interesting times, and I was born in a very interesting place. And I just got somehow, don't know how, got a gene within me that made me see that world and want to tell stories about it, want to write about it, want to put it down on paper. So,
do you prefer writing novels or writing for TV shows and movies?
The pride of ownership that goes with a novel is way bigger than the pride of ownership that goes with writing a script. But if you want to be a present father and a present husband, it's way better to be writing scripts. To write a book, I need to be like, for the most part, 9 times out of 10, when I write a book, it has to be like, as soon as I get up in the morning, I have to get right to my desk. I have to stay focused. I can't allow anything in. If so much a knock on the door can kill a day's work. I could write a script at 3:00 in the afternoon on the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl. It's just a different thing. You just kind of, a script is like a blueprint. That's all it is. And 200 and plus people are going to be adding to that blueprint, and they're going to be extrapolating off that blueprint.
I feel like the entry points are much easier, or the re-entry points are much easier in a script.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect example. You don't have to get in the head. You don't have to just, you sort of like, you're already there. Now, what are they doing? What are you seeing? That's what you're writing, not where are they mentally? You can think about that later, but it's more, you just go in and you just move the furniture.
Yeah.
Have you ever regretted something you wrote?
I regretted once rushing a book into publication. I regretted allowing my publisher for me to rush a book. And that's why from that point on, I never put out a book a year from that point on. This is the last book that was on a sort of a book a year treadmill, because I'm not gifted in that way. Speed is not my friend.
Can I recall something, Dennis? You may remember it, but you were sitting right in front of me talking when it happened. When Mystic River published, you were offered a choice. the evening that we were talking.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Between
yeah.
a new contract with presumably more money, or anything else you wanted.
He
And
just
what
said,
you chose,
what do you want? And I
yeah,
said, I want to end the deadlines. And
that's
my,
what you said. I know it.
yeah,
I still remember that,
yeah.
because everybody in the room was thinking Dennis is going to ask for a huge pay raise. And Dennis says, no, he says, I just want time. I want time on my own pace.
Again, yeah, Gillian and I were talking about this last week. We were Gillian Flynn, and we were talking about how, look, there's a lot of people out there who do this thing, which I do not denigrate at all. I'm like, damn, I wish I could do it. I mean, damn, how do you do it? Which is they put out a book a year of very consistent quality. I'm not talking about the people just phoning in. I'm talking about the people who really do the job. And I can't do it. I can't. I've tried. And I just see what comes out is just crap. And so I just, I bought my way out of that. And I've been very happy that I then produced the best 14 novels I could produce over the course of my career, while other people were, lapping me and lapping me and lapping. It's just like, I'm used to that. My brother was way faster than me. I'm used
And
to
how
it.
great that you got the opportunity and you also had enough self-knowledge about your own creative process to take advantage of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
How do you put yourself in a present tense mindset for a story in the past?
Ooh,
Hmm.
good question.
You just catch the wave. I don't know how else to put it. Like you never know why. I'm not going to say I know why. Usually, why I do something. I think that's a lot of novelists, a lot of artists make it up. They tell you that they knew why, but they don't know why. This just felt right from the beginning. I was like, this is a present tense book. This is just present tense. Coming in present tense. It's gonna work. The example I give that I remember writing, I don't know how I knew this. I wrote a short story once, it's the best short story I ever wrote, called Until Gwen. And I wrote it, and it was third person. And I wrote it all in a fury, this flurry one night, because I was over deadline. And John Harvey, who was waiting on the book, called me and said, like, where's the story? So I wrote it all one night, and I got up the next morning and I read through it, and I thought, I think this works, but it would be so much better in second person.
Second, right? Yeah.
And I switched it into second person, which I've never written in before in my life. I can't tell you why I did that. And the moment I did it, I was like, this story rocks. Like, I knew it. I'm not going to be falsely modest. I was like, I had that story. And I was like, that's it. I don't know why. That's for critics to figure out. I just sort of write it.
For both you and Michael, what does a book mean to you? And do you think literature changes people's lives?
Well, the small questions. I love these little small, easy questions. Yeah.
They've wanted to talk this entire time, Dennis, and they didn't have a chance.
Michael, you want to take it all?
I mean, I can answer, and I guess there were two parts there. In reverse order, can literature change lives? My immediate instinct there is like, that's a little grandiose. But then I realized, well, it changed mine. I mean, it absolutely changed mine. So yes, I do believe that. I think the first part of the question was, what does a book mean?
Yeah, what does a book mean to you?
That one, that's tougher. It is,
Maybe either
I
creating
guess it's
one
like a
or reading.
representation of endurance, really. I mean, you kind of hung in there until the end. You're never going to be happy with it. At least I'm not. But there's something about finishing the race, and it's fun. It's real. It's tangible. It's up on the shelf, and I'll be gone. The book will still be there. There's something about creating something that outlasts you that is cool.
Yeah, a book's finite. I mean, that's what's so great about it. It's just once it's done and it's copy set, it's out in the world. It's not going to change unless you're Agatha Christie. God help you, or Roald Dahl right now. Like that, which I just think is just despicable. Just annotate, just annotate. So put in little asterisks and then little nods and give people the context and let them read the book and think what they want to read. But I think I think that a book, I think the question of can a book change a life? Yes, a book can. Again, books change my life. Can it change the world? About that, it's a different deal. But as far as I've fallen in literary love with this writer named Claire Keegan. I read everything she's written in the last year, everything. And the feeling I feel when I'm reading work that moves me, that's being written literally on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in Ireland, and then it somehow comes through time. It comes through consciousness, and it connects with you. Two strangers. I don't know her, she doesn't know me, but reading her books, I feel like she's literally communicating directly to me in that moment. And I'm in like awe of that. That's a great feeling. I love that about a book, and you can't get that from anything else.
For Dennis, where did the title Small Mercies come from?
Well, my first title was Commonwealth, which is the name of the housing project they stay in. And apparently Ed Patchen had a book called Commonwealth. And so they told me I couldn't have Commonwealth because, so I called Anne and I texted her, and I was just like, it's an outrage. Here I am, a late middle-aged white man getting my title stolen by retroactively. And she said, yes, it's a pity. You guys don't get enough. So Small Mercies became just my next choice. I think it's now I've finally come to the belief with a lot of other people that it's a better title. But it wasn't my first. But I think it's a book about the little tiny blessings and mercies we have in our lives that can get us through. And in this hard scrabble life of Mary Pat Fennessy in 1974 in the housing projects, she needs every small mercy she can get.
How long did it take you to write Small Mercies?
It's about 7 months, I think.
How long in the first draft?
That's what I mean. I think it was like 7 months.
Okay.
I feel like I wrapped it not long after coming back from New Orleans. So I didn't finish it all in New Orleans, but I wrote the vast majority of it in New Orleans.
Can you talk about Bobby and how did he escape hate?
Bobby is just I think he has a gentle nature. I think he's a guy who gets thrown into situations. He went to Vietnam very young. He came back with a heroin addiction, which by the time the book picks up, he has kicked it. He's 2 years kicked it. But the thing that I loved the most about Bobby was his family. He lives in a house with 5 of his sisters and one brother, and they have a child. Bobby's child is 10-year-old that comes and visits them on weekends, and they're the village that raises that child. And I'll be 100% open on this. They are based on cousins of mine, and who raised a child that way and lived in this ramshackle house their entire lives. And I wanted to put that energy into a book for years now. So Bobby is Bobby because of his sisters, I feel, and his relationship with his sisters. I feel like that's what makes him as good a person as he is. And he was raised, and he then famously says in the book, or not famously, but he says very memorably, he says in the book, when his love interest asks him why, as an Irish cop from Dorchester, he's not racist. He describes his parents and says, my parents, I want to tell you that I did not have good parents, and that they were disasters, and that they hated each other, and that they hated their failed dreams, and they were not good people. But among all the things that they hated racism. They said that they felt that the idea of it offended them. Not that anybody was, they didn't think that anybody was better than anybody else. They just thought everybody was the same fucking idiot. And it didn't matter what the color of your skin was. And the idea of it was just, offensive to them. And so when I say, this was wisdom handed down, they weren't, not by saints, but by regular people. And I think that was a reflection of my own, that my father would sit at the dinner table and the height of all this and his thick Irish accent. And he would always say, there's no difference between anybody, whether they're black, white, green, or purple. That was we were like, where are the green people, Dad? But this was
That's the small mercy though, that you're talking about. Yeah.
That was it. And that didn't affect it. That didn't land with everybody in my family, but it landed with me and landed with my brother. So.
And finally, what would you like to do with your life now?
Oh shit, man. I just want to keep doing it. Like, what I'm doing right now is what I'm doing. Like I think I say this with all modesty, and the thing that I am so happy about and that I've held on to since the very beginning of my career, right up straight through now, is I can't believe I get paid for this. I can't believe they let me do it. And there's nothing I want to do more. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm like the kid who's like, my dad's got a bar and let's put on a show. Like, that's what I am. And I'm like a giddy little child when it comes to what I get paid to do. My father worked at Sears and Roebuck for 35 years. The bloom came off that rose, I'm sure, by like week 2. But he did it to put food on the table for his family. I get to make shit up, and they pay me like extravagantly at this point. And it's like, wow. I mean, how can you ask for more? Like, literally, all I want to do is just keep doing this. And I literally want to, I don't believe in retirement at all. You retire from jobs that suck. You don't retire from this. This is too much fun.
So Dennis and Michael are leading their best lives for right now. Right, just as you and I are, Ian, and hopefully people who are watching it. Thank you very much, guys. It's really been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank everybody who's joined us virtually. And to remind you that we have autographed wrong book. Actually, I've been reading John Banville, who I can say I think is an Irish writer reluctant to write crime, but at least he's writing it under his own name now.
Oh, it's very, I like the, you should go out to Halloween like that. I think that'll look good.
Right. In any case, thank you all very much. Dennis, it was really a pleasure to see you. Michael, looking forward to seeing you in July. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Michael.